of her talk is Can I Have Your Data?
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me today, and I'm very excited to share our research on recommendations for sharing neuroimaging data upon a personal request. In the field of neuroimaging, there has been a growing interest in data sharing, and it has become as a part of a common research practice. And for the last few decades, numerous data repositories have been developed around the world, becoming the main avenue to share neuroimaging research data. But a significant portion of data sharing still takes place through direct communication between researchers. And however, unlike sharing through repositories that have standardized protocols, sharing data upon a direct personal request can be very challenging. Researchers often need to negotiate the terms of sharing and use of data case by case against the backdrop of complex ethical and regulatory requirements, not to mention technical issues regarding data transfer and management. And in this study, we aim to help researchers navigate these challenges by examining key considerations throughout the data sharing process and offering practical tips from a case study. We first divide the process of sharing data into 5 stages: requesting data, negotiating terms of sharing and use of data, transferring data, managing and analyzing data, and lastly, sharing the outcome of secondary analysis of data. And we identified key factors to consider from the ethical principles of human subject research, applicable laws and regulations, funding agencies' data sharing policies, and institutional guidance on data sharing. And this study also draws on practical insights from an ongoing case study led by one of the authors, Dr. Martin Norgaard. Now let's review the points to consider at each stage of data sharing. When a researcher identifies a data set relevant to his or her future research, the first step to take is initiating a contact with the party who owns or who is responsible for managing the data. And it will be helpful to check the data availability statements in an associated publication, if any, to get the information on who to contact. And in this initial conversation, the requester will want to inquire about the availability of data sets, more specifically the types of data available. For example, whether individual level raw data or only derived data are available. And the requester would also want to check availability of any associated metadata or other supporting documentation, including code, that could facilitate interpretation and analysis of data. And upon the receipt of the request, the owner or manager of the data should first check the requester's credentials to ensure the legitimacy of the request. And it is very important to review and check whether there are any limitations on sharing and secondary use of data in the original informed consent. And the data provider would also want to consider potential harm to data subjects and the rigor and social value of the proposed reuse. And once both parties agree to share data, now the long process of negotiating terms for sharing and secondary use of data will begin. And these terms in a more formal contractual documentation is called Data Use Agreement, or DUA. And the agreement between the two parties should first define the institutions and individuals who will provide the data and who will use and analyze the data, and the permitted and prohibited uses and disclosures of the data. And parties should also specify types of data and data elements to be shared, and a specific time period to access and use the data, and data de-identification requirements and methods to transfer and receive the data. And also include requirements under any applicable laws and regulations, and prohibitions against recontacting or re-identifying data subjects, and any flow-down restrictions terms in addition to responsibilities regarding data privacy and confidentiality. And also confirm institutional oversight and review on the risks associated with data sharing, and also confirm that data security safeguards are in place. And finally, set forth breach reporting and incident mitigation requirements and requirements to share study results at the conclusion of the secondary analysis and publication expectations, including authorship requirement. And once both parties sign the agreed term, actual process of sharing will begin. And in this stage, personnel on each side will need to clarify the types of data and specific list of data elements and pre-processing steps and format for data to be shared, and the method to transfer and receive the data. And parties should also check whether data are de-identified as agreed. And once the data transfer is completed, now the data are in the requester's hand, and it's time for the requester to conduct his or her secondary analysis. And in this stage, it's the recipient's duty to report any incidents of unauthorized disclosure or misuse of data. And finally, when the secondary analysis is completed, the recipient of data should share the results of the secondary analysis and acknowledge the data providers in the publications, and if allowed under the agreement, share or deposit derived data. And the data provider should also confirm that any further disclosure of data alongside the publications complies with the terms in the agreement. And now Dr. Norgaard will share practical tips from the case study.
All right, so I will go through some of the practicals of a recent study that I did. So the case study involves extensive sharing of neuroimaging data sets from multiple research groups. The goal was to do a meta-analysis of molecular imaging of the serotonin transporter in major depression. And the goal was to collect 782 subjects collected from 7 sites spanning countries of USA, Canada, UK, Denmark, Germany, and Austria. And some of the, this is just to highlight some parts of the case study and some of the outcomes. So what you see here are first the different sites. You can see that there are a few sites that were rejected, Germany and Toronto. Germany for very restrictive data sharing policies, KMH and Toronto because they were not interested in sharing the data. 4 studies in total, at now at least, I managed to receive the data. 1 is still ongoing. And just to give you some perspective about the time it took from initial contact to receival rejection, the lowest was 2 months, whereas the largest one or the highest one was 12 months. Number of email correspondences ranging from just a few and up to about +100. You know, one thing is when you finally get the data, you think all is good, but then when you start to analyze it, you realize that there might be something missing, there might be things wrong with the data. So in my case, I also had several sites where I actually needed to go back and request fixes to the data, again ranging from no fixes and up to about 20 fixes at the NIMH. This is largely also just summarizing some of the steps that Annie stated. So you have here like a template email for how to contact the people, and then you have the different stages ranging from requesting data and to sharing the outcome of secondary analysis of data. So you want to reach out first. I decided to offer co-authorship to the authors to kind of like create an incentive that can obviously be discussed. You should state what data from previous studies should be shared, offer various strategies for sharing the data to ease local resources spent on sharing data. You can offer help to do it. You can also visit it if you have the resources. And in general, offer solutions to share the data. It could be box.com, Google Drive, Dropbox, USB drive by email was also suggested by one of them. I would definitely encourage all of you to keep your collaborators updated with your progress and send them intermediate results of your analyses. And if the data is shared in an unstructured way, consider to structure the data in a standardized way, then it can also be reused for others. Then one final important point that I want to make is that you should already in the beginning negotiate what kind of derived data that can be used. because this is obviously very important if you plan to publish your derived data as well. So you don't get to that stage and then you find out that you can actually not do that. So to summarize, in this study, we proposed best practices for sharing neuroimaging data upon direct personal request by summarizing crucial factors to consider at each stage of data sharing. We provided some practical tips from a case study on how to facilitate this process while minimizing friction and frustrations. But our case study also shows that researchers should on average expect to spend up to 8 months on data sharing efforts by direct personal request, which in some cases, in my case, can be extended up to 24 months due to additional requests. So a key highlight of this talk is definitely to say that the current state of direct personal requests to share data is far from ideal and standardized. And it will be particularly risky for early career scientists that are often working on projects with a 2 to 3 year time frame. And with that, thank you for your attention.
So we will be looking at the app, so you can either put through your questions through the app or come forward to the microphone and to ask your question. There is no question yet. I've got someone. Good, thank you.
Thank you for your talk. I think a few of us feel seen here after that. Specifically on the question of recontacting researchers to fix their data, provide more metadata, clarify all that stuff. I really appreciated that academic formalization of the table of how many times it takes. My question is, like, how would you classify the kinds of problems they were having? Like, what were the main buckets of pain points, and how did you get over that? And or how did you fix your materials or best practices to solve that for the next researcher? What were like the big learnings there, I guess?
That's a great question. So I think most of the issues that I experienced was when I started to process the data. So there were issues with some of the data. Some files were empty, and that could have happened during like the data transfer. But also, noticing things that original authors has not found before, like excessive amount of motion in some of the data. What do you do about that? But yeah, it was mostly on the processing side that I wanted to go back and try to have them do some fixes.
So because we lost a few minutes before, we might have to stop it there, but please ask the question later on at the end of the session. So can we please have the next speaker? So hopefully now we'll have